Our memory is this incredible chain that connects our past to our present. It's the very thing that makes us who we are. But what happens when that chain breaks? Let's dive into this by taking a look at one of the most profound cases of memory loss ever recorded.
Okay, so picture this scene. An accomplished musician, a man named Clive Wearing, is by himself, maybe playing the piano. His wife, Deborah, walks into the room, and the moment he sees her, he leaps up and greets her with this just unrestrained joy, the kind of joy you'd feel seeing a loved one after a really, really long time.
But here's where it gets strange. She just slips out for a moment to grab a glass of water. When she comes back in, maybe a minute later, he gives her that exact same bright, enthusiastic, I haven't seen you in ages greeting. This happened over and over and over again. So what on earth was going on?
Well, back in 1985, Clive Wearing, this London musician, contracted a very rare virus that just ravaged his central nervous system. And the result was one of the most severe cases of amnesia ever documented. It left him completely unable to form new memories, and he couldn't recall almost anything from his past. But Clive's condition showed us something absolutely fascinating. Memory isn't just one single thing. See, he couldn't remember personal events, like at all, not even the last time he saw his wife just moments before. But he could still speak perfect English, he knew how to get dressed, and he could still play the piano beautifully. This tells us our brains store different kinds of memories, like skills, in a completely different way from our personal fact-based ones.
To really help illustrate how this all works, let's do a quick little test. Take a look at this name right here, Leonidas. Go ahead, try to lock it into your mind, because we're going to come back to it in just a little bit. So, if our brain has all this information stored away, how do we actually get to it? Whether it's a name we literally just learned or a skill we've had for years, what's the actual process for pulling it out of that mental filing cabinet?
First things first, let's get a clear definition on the table. Technically speaking, memory is just learning that has stuck around over time. It's information that's been stored and, most of the time, can be recalled. And that process of recalling, that's what we usually think of when we say the word memory.
We typically access our memories in two main ways, through recall and recognition. And I guarantee you've experienced both of these every single time you've had to study for a test. Let's break down what the difference really is.
Just think of it this way. Recall is like a fill-in-the-blank question. You have to reach back into the depths of your mind and pull the answer out of what feels like thin air. Recognition, on the other hand, that's like a multiple-choice question. The answer is right there in front of you, you just have to identify it. And that's why recognition feels so much easier for our brains.
Okay, so we know how we access memories, but how does a random piece of information actually become a memory in the first place? Well, back in the 1960s, a couple of psychologists named Atkinson and Shiffrin broke the whole process down into three key stages.
Now, it sounds simple, but it is incredibly complex. First, our brain has to encode the information, basically get it into the system. Then it has to store it somewhere for future use. And finally, we have to be able to retrieve it when we need it. If there's a failure at any one of those stages, poof, no memory.
Speaking of retrieval, what was that name I asked you to remember a minute ago? If you can still recall it, it's because you successfully managed to shuffle it from just a fleeting sensory impression into your short-term memory, probably by just repeating it over and over in your head.
But here's the catch with that. Our short-term memory is incredibly, short. Research shows it can really only hold between 4 to 7 distinct bits of information at any one time. At that point, the memory either just decays and disappears, or it gets transferred into long-term memory. And that long-term memory? Whoa, that's a whole different animal. It's not some temporary holding area. It's like a vast, durable, and just ridiculously spacious storage unit. It holds all of our knowledge, our skills, and our life experiences. Now, since those early days, our understanding has gotten a bit more sophisticated. Psychologists now tend to prefer the term working memory over short-term memory because it does a better job of capturing the active, dynamic process of taking in new info and connecting it with everything we already have in long-term storage.
And this whole process works on two parallel tracks. There's explicit processing, which is conscious and active. It's what you're doing right now, deliberately trying to learn these facts. But then there's implicit processing, and that's totally automatic. You don't have to try to remember that feeling of dread when you think about the dentist. Your brain just does it for you based on past experiences.
These two processes create different kinds of long-term memories.
Procedural memory is all the how-to stuff, like riding a bike. Episodic memory, though, that's your life story, tied to specific events. And this brings us all the way back to Clive Wearing. His episodic memory was completely destroyed, but his procedural memory for playing the piano, it remained perfectly intact.
So understanding these systems isn't just some academic exercise. We can actually use this knowledge to actively improve our own memory. Let's look at a few really powerful techniques that are grounded in this science.
First up is something called chunking. This one's a classic. Our brains really struggle with long strings of individual items, but if we group them into familiar, manageable units or chunks, it becomes dramatically easier, right? A phone number isn't 7 random digits. It's a 3-digit chunk and a 4-digit chunk. So much simpler.
Next up, it's all about depth. Shallow processing is when you encode something on a really basic level, like just noticing the font of the word Leonidas. You'll forget that in a heartbeat. But deep processing is encoding based on meaning, connecting Leonidas to the whole story of a heroic Spartan warrior king. That creates a much, much stronger memory.
And really, here's the ultimate key to making a memory stick. Connect it to yourself. The more personally meaningful or emotionally relevant you make a piece of information, the more deeply your brain is going to encode it. It stops being just a random fact, it becomes part of your story. Which really brings us full circle. Our memory is unbelievably powerful. It's constantly shaping our brains, our lives, our entire sense of self. For Clive Wearing, the inability to recall his past or create new memories meant he lost a critical part of who he was.
And that leaves us with a final, kind of lingering thought. Our memories are the narrative of our lives. They connect our past to our present, and they let us imagine a future. So just take a moment and ask yourself, without them, who would you even be?